again.
Good morning. I have to admit, I was wondering a little bit at the beginning of this series if there were going to be enough of us that admitted that we had big fat mouths. But as we went through each week of the series, I've had a bunch of conversation with many of you, and I've heard story after story that reassured me that you're as I am when it comes to the things that come out of your big fat mouth. So thank you for making me feel better during this process. One of my greatest hopes for this series has been that you truly recognize the power of your words. Because we've been reminded that our words have the power to give life and they have the power to take life away. And since Jesus tells us that we speak from the overflow of our hearts, that means that everything that comes out of our mouths reflects something that's going on at a deeper level inside of us. And if you're like me at all with the words you use, we recognize that sometimes we do a horrible job of reflecting the faith we profess to have and the Savior that we claim to represent. Now, in week one, we looked at about how much we complain, and I'm guessing if you were intentional with thinking about the message over the last few weeks as they've unfolded, you realized that you complain about things more than you thought you did, even if a lot of them are small complaints. We recognize the primary reason that we complain is because we constantly take our focus off of the goodness of God, and instead we place it on ourselves. We lose focus of the bigger picture of what God is doing, and instead we focus on our own agenda and our own wants and how they aren't being met, and that leads to a bunch of complaining. In week two, we focused on the tendency to be critical, and we're all guilty at times of being nitpicky, of being unkind, of being cruel, of being judgmental with how we view and how we treat other people. And when it comes right down to it, we have two choices when it comes to how we use our words. We can choose to be fault finders, or we can choose to be hope dealers. A single word of criticism can pierce somebody's soul and stick with them for years and years. And on the flip side of that, a single word of encouragement can build somebody up and give them the faith to move on. Last week, we talked about our tendency to lie. And sometimes they're little lies, and sometimes they're much more significant lies. But whenever we lie, and no matter how big or small the lie is, we are speaking the language of our spiritual enemy, whose greatest desire is to pull us away from God. So if he can get you to tell lies, if he can get you to believe lies about yourself, and ultimately if he can get you to live a lie by claiming to be one thing but secretly living something else, he has victory in your life. And Jesus tells us that the truth is what sets us free. So we confess to God for forgiveness, but then we go the extra step to confess to those who love God and who love us so that we can find healing and start down a new path with our lives, a path that is God-honoring and focused on His will and His purpose for our lives. Now, to get started with this week's topic, let me ask you this. What is your absolute favorite snack? Absolute favorite snack. Tell somebody next to you. What is your absolute favorite snack? Some of you can't narrow it down to one, can you? You're like, what? You're just like plowing right through it. So, okay. So I know I can hear the conversation over here. Chips? Is that what I heard in the front row there? Look. Okay. So mine is peanut M&Ms is one of my absolute favorite. Anybody else? Did that come up on anybody's list? Peanut M&Ms? They are awesome, right? And now the beautiful thing is you can buy M&Ms in a lot of different sizes, can't you? All right? You can waste time and you can buy the fun size. Like they come in a bag with like 20 packs of the fun size, and you're looking at it like, really? This is insulting kind of a thing, right? And then you move up to the 11-ounce sharing pack. Sharing. Like that's going to happen. Whatever. Right? And then we move up to the family pack. 20 ounces of beautiful peanut M&Ms. And then, this is where I get so excited, people, because the next one is the party size. All right? The 42-ounce. But this morning I learned brand new information. Larry brought to my attention. There is a pantry pack, 62 ounces. You know what? Let's just call it a morning and let's go find some of those. My gosh. Let's just look at that and admire that for a minute. Man, that is beautiful, isn't it? But here's my point with me and snacks, and let me know if you're like that. Regardless of whatever size it is, it's a single sit-down serving for me. Anybody else? Anybody else? It doesn't matter. Fun size, pantry size. It's a single sit-down. I got an amen back there from Steve. Thank you. You know, but when I think about how much I love peanut M&Ms, it reminds me of today's topic, which is gossip. Now, Chris, how in the world do M&Ms have anything to do with gossip? I'm so glad that you asked. So the connection is they're both dangerously addictive, all right? Just like it's hard to stop a hunger for M&Ms, it can be equally difficult to stop a hunger for gossip. Look at the comparison that we see in the Bible when we look at Proverbs 18:8. It says, "The words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts." Right? In other words, gossip is like my beloved peanut M&Ms. They taste so good all the way down. Right? It's easy to get caught up in gossip, though, isn't it? You can just be in a regular old conversation talking to people, and all of a sudden someone says something like this, "Hey, did you hear about?" And you're like, "What? What happened? Really? Really? That's awesome." And then what did they do? "Really? Are you kidding me? I can't be that." And did so-and-so? "No, I did so-and-so." And you get in these conversations, and you're... Should have brought some water up. But gossip, it happens all the time around us, doesn't it? There's an old saying that gossip can actually travel around the world and back before the truth can get out of bed and put its pants on. That's pretty true, isn't it? Especially today, in light of all the social media that people use, it takes nothing more than the snap of the fingers or a push of the post button, and all of a sudden everybody knows, and it's shared about this, and it's spread all over the place. And have you ever noticed that a lot of times, the more that gossip is shared, the more versions of the story are out there, and the further it actually gets from the truth. It starts over here as one thing, but it ends up over here as something completely different. How many of you remember the old game when we played the telephone game? Remember that? Now, for you young kids, that's before, we had all the phones to play all our games on and everything, so we had to be a little more creative. So we came up with this game, the telephone game, right? If you haven't heard of that game, it's where you kind of sit next to each other, get in a line or whatever. First person comes up with a sentence, and thank you. You are the man. Thank you. I will. I'm just saying, you just about heard some words from your pastor you haven't heard from up on stage there. I'll just tell you what. Now, totally lost my train of thought here. I still got my hand full, though. So, but if you haven't heard of that game, what do? The first person has a line, right? And they whisper it to the next person, and then they turn and whisper it to the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And usually by the time you get to the last person, you have them say what they think has been passed along. And usually it's nothing close. If you have a long enough line, it's nothing even close to that, right? The stories change, and then you end up with a bunch of people saying, "Well, what did you hear? And what'd you hear? And what'd you hear? And what'd you hear?" And gossip's going everywhere. And the sad truth is that gossip is incredibly harmful. The fact of the matter is, when you've been stung by gossip, regardless of your age, you know the pain that it can inflict. And maybe for you, you've lost a friendship over some gossip that somebody shared. Maybe you confided something in somebody, and then they turned around and they shared it with others, and in turn, those people cut you off or they treated you differently as a result. Gossiping is no laughing matter. It can sting because those rumors sink deep into a person's heart. Now, for those of us that claim to follow Christ, we can just find ways to disguise the gossip, right? What do we call it? A prayer request. Call it a prayer request. "Hey, we really need to pray for Nikki. Did you hear what her boss said?" "No, I didn't. Tell me. What did her boss say? What happened? And then what happened? And who said what to who? And who's going to do something about that?" Right? We need to pray for the Wilsons' marriage. Bill moved out last week, and I saw him at lunch with another woman today. "Oh, really? Who was it? Did you know her? What did you think? Is somebody going to talk to her?" I'm going to put these down because, they say they don't melt in your hands, so they're not true. That's just not true at all. So But we need to be careful here because it's very easy to start down the gossip trail, isn't it? And the pushback I get sometimes is, but Chris, it's truth, so it's okay. We aren't spreading false information. So let me just give you a little bit of food for thought on that. Last week we talked about the importance of telling the complete truth, didn't we? To make sure that we aren't stretching or bending the truth. And here's something else we need to know about truth. Not everything that is true must be said. Not everything that is true must be said. Just because it's truth doesn't mean it's your mission in life to tell others that truth. Just because you know the truth of a situation doesn't mean that it's your responsibility to make sure everybody else knows it as well. Think back to one of the main themes that we've had going in this series. What do you want to be known for? Speaking life and encouragement and building others up, or tearing people down and bringing death to that individual? Hopefully the answer to that is really easy. Of course, we should want to speak life over people because we realize that speaking death actually hurts people, and it should never be our intent to hurt people. But gossip can hurt so many different people, and I want to talk for a few minutes about the people that gossip can actually hurt. So if you're taking notes, the first point is that gossip hurts the person that it speaks about, the person that it is spoken about. Remember, gossip can be something that's untrue or true. Either way, it can hurt the person that is spoken about. Look at what it says in Proverbs 16:28. A troublemaker plants seeds of strife. Gossip separates the best of friends. Some of you have experienced exactly what that verse is talking about, haven't you? You've been separated from a really close friendship or maybe even a family member because of gossip. Somebody shared something they shouldn't have. And maybe for you, they shared something that was as simple in your world as a secret crush that you had on somebody. Or maybe it's something even more significant, like maybe you confided in somebody that you had an addiction, maybe to a substance, maybe to pornography, and you shared it in confidence with somebody, and then it got spread around. Maybe it's that somebody shared about a struggle that you're having in your marriage. You shared that with a confidant and a friend, and they just couldn't help it. They shared it with somebody else, and then it became a prayer request. And the next thing you know, your spouse finds out about it, and things just blow up in your face, and you feel the pain of gossip. Gossip hurts the person that it's spoken about. And it not only hurts the person that's spoken about, it also hurts the speaker. Remember, again, another one of our main themes that I've been emphasizing in this series is that there is power in every word that comes out of our mouths, and that we speak out of the overflow of our heart. So everything that comes out of our mouths comes from something that is deeper going on inside of you. So when we gossip, whether it's based on lies or truth, we hurt ourselves in the process. Look at what it says in Proverbs 25:9. When arguing with your neighbor, don't betray another person's secret. The Proverbs were given to us to give us wisdom in how to live out our daily lives. And this proverb recognizes our tendency to gossip, especially when we feel we're being wronged. Have you ever had a friend that you were close to, but then something happened and you got into an argument and you had a falling out, and suddenly what was shared with them in confidence is now being used against you by that other person with others? My guess is all of us are guilty of being that person at some point or another in our lives as well. When we get wronged, we want to lash back at that person. And one of the easiest ways to do it is to use the information that we know or want others to believe, and we start yapping our big fat mouths. And the real danger here is if you ever get the reputation of being a gossip, that's going to be a really hard reputation for you to ever overcome. You can spend a lifetime working on building a good reputation with others, but if you become somebody who is known as somebody who gossips regularly, you can ruin your reputation for good. I mean, think about it. When you listen or you're hearing somebody speak gossip, nobody ever looks at the person speaking gossip and tearing somebody down and thinks, man, I would love to be like you one day. Man, I would love to be like you. Tearing people down with your words, destroying them. I would love to be like you. That's not what you think, right? You probably think like I do. When I'm around somebody who's talking gossip about others, I think to myself, I wonder what they say about me when I'm not around. And I also think I better be careful of what I say right now, because who knows who they're going to share that with. Because here's the truth. When you talk badly about people who are not around, it says a whole lot more about you than the person you're speaking about. Nobody looks on at you because you're sharing a dainty little morsel and thinks, I want to be like you. They actually want to stay away from you. Gossip hurts everybody. So the goal then should be very simple. Stop it. Or as I've been saying through this series, knock it off. And how do we do that? I'm going to give you two simple and practical ways to do this. Neither is extremely profound in itself, but if you actually put them into practice, they will drastically change the way that you interact with gossip on a daily basis. The first thing we need to do is we need to guard our ears. We need to guard our ears. Have you ever had somebody come to you and start venting about somebody, and they start throwing out all kinds of gossip about that person? Now remember, that gossip might be based on lies or it might be based on truth. That still doesn't need to be talked about in this kind of context. And I came across an article that said you could stop gossip with one question. What do you think that one question would be? I was intrigued enough to read the article, and what I found out was that it wasn't a profound question, it isn't a spiritual question on the surface, and it isn't a complex question. But it's a question that forces you to get to the heart of the matter very quickly. And that simple question is this: why are you telling me this? Why are you telling me this? It's not a question that has to be said with an attitude. Why are you telling me this? It doesn't need to be said with judgment. It's just simply stated. Why are you telling me this? And the article goes on to say that simply asking this question causes the person to stop and take a mental inventory of why they are choosing to say this to you right now. It's a good question. And I think there's another equally important question to ask at times like this, and that is this: have you had a chance to talk to so-and-so about this? Have you had a chance to talk to so-and-so about this? And my guess is that about 99% of the time, that's probably on the low side, of the times that you ask that question, their response is going to be no. To which we simply reply, well, then maybe you need to talk to them about this matter. Case closed. Change the subject. Moving on. You don't sit there and go, oh, tell me more. You shut it down because it's not something that you need to be a part of. It's something they need to work out with that other person. You need to focus on guarding your ears. But let's face it, ultimately sometimes, no matter how many great questions we ask, people just won't shut their big fat mouths, right? And you get to the point where you're thinking, this is crazy. They just keep gossiping all the time. And the reality is that you may get to the point where you realize that you need to change the boundaries in your relationship, or you might need to sever it altogether. Look at what it says in Proverbs 20, verse 19. A gossip goes around telling secrets, so don't hang around with chatterers. You may need to distance yourself from a relationship or limit your interaction with that person. And in doing this, we aren't trying to be mean. We're simply trying to be faithful in guarding our ears and ultimately our hearts and our minds as well. So we said that the first thing that we need to do in knocking off the gossip is to guard our ears. And the second thing that we need to do is close our mouth. I told you, these aren't profound in and of themselves, but if you put them into practice, game changers. Close our mouth. It's very simple, but it's very effective. Guard our ears, close our mouth. Look at what it says in Proverbs 21:23. Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. Watch your tongue. Now do this for me. Stick out your tongue so you can just look down and see the very end of it. Go ahead and do that. All right? Okay, there was no point to that at all. I just wanted to see how many of you were going to do that. So be posting those later on. Got these groups right here. Pretty good. Okay, but seriously, what does the proverb tell us to do? Be mindful of our tongues. In other words, be very aware of the words that we choose to come out of our mouths. And part of being mindful of our tongues is the ability to keep our mouths shut when we aren't going to use God-honoring words that allow us to be hope dealers in other people's lives. And when we do this effectively, Proverb tells us what? We stay out of trouble. A good question to ask ourselves to keep us in check in this area is this: would I want someone sharing similar information about me if I were not around? Would I want someone sharing similar information about me if I were not around? This is another question that's based on what Jesus teaches. Imagine that. The Bible's an amazing thing. It's like the God who authored it created us and knows us better than we know ourselves or something, right? It's good stuff. In the Gospel of Luke, we read these from Jesus in Luke 6, verse 31. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. So the question becomes, when you're about to speak something about another person who is not around, would you want someone speaking the same kind of information about you if you were not around? Here's one of the things we need to recognize about gossip. If you were here last week, you heard me talking about how we lie sometimes so that we can feel better about ourselves. We stretch the truth or we gloss over some of the truth so that we can feel better about who we are and what we're capable of doing. And gossip has the same effect in many ways. Having something juicy to talk about makes us feel better. It makes us feel more put together, like we have less issues for the moment because we're focused on somebody else. You see, we share gossip because if I can just simply take a moment and I can talk about somebody else's lack of fashion sense, if I can talk about somebody else's problems on social media with their obsession, if I can talk about somebody else's addiction, somebody else's porn problems, if I can talk about somebody else's bad marriage, then I don't have to talk about mine. And if I can just push somebody else down, I can step over them just a little bit to make myself feel just a little bit better. And when it comes right down to it, here's the thing. Ultimately, the problem behind all of these things we're talking in this series, the problem with gossip, the problem with complaining, with criticizing, with lying, ultimately, it isn't our big fat mouths. It's our broken and sin-stained hearts. That's the problem. Because Jesus said what? We've said it several times in this series. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Gossip claims that I am strong because they are weak. But the gospel of Jesus Christ proclaims, I am weak, but he is strong. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. When we recognize who we are, when we recognize whose we are, it begins to change our heart. You see, when we begin to understand and realize that, we start claiming those things that Scripture tells about us. We look at the Psalms and we read, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. The book of Ephesians tells me that I am God's workmanship. I am created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And in fact, some of those works, God says, you know what? I started a good work in you, and I'm going to be faithful, and I'm going to complete that up until the day that Jesus returns. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to do something special inside of you. And you realize that you're designed and you're created with a purpose and a plan, and that God has a good plan for your life. Plans not to harm you, but to prosper you, to help you to move forward and live a life that gives Him glory. And in that knowledge, and in the knowledge that in my very weakness, in those moments where I am most tempted to complain and criticize and lie and gossip, in those very moments in my greatest weakness, He is strong. And when we lean into that, God begins to transform us from the inside out. And when our hearts start to become transformed and we recognize I don't have to try to put others down to feel like I'm accepted or that I'm loved, but I understand that from God's viewpoint, I am unconditionally loved and accepted by the Creator of the universe. I don't need to be as concerned with what people say about me on social media, but rather about what God, the creator and the sustainer of this universe, says and speaks about me. And when my heart gets transformed and he gets a hold of my heart, he also gets a hold of my big fat mouth. And my mouth goes from complaining and criticizing and lying and gossiping to speaking life over people, to being a hope dealer. I start to speak truth and love because I don't need to be better than you. I need to help point you to the one who made me better. And I begin to see that I can now speak life into others. The Bible tells us to encourage one another daily. We begin to realize that we can be a vessel used by God to speak life and truth over somebody else and help them realize that they too can be transformed by a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So let me ask you this. What if you did get caught, but not gossiping? What if you got caught encouraging somebody? What would that even look like? Well, maybe it'd look like this. Hey, did you hear what John said about you? No, I didn't. What did he say? Well, he said that he has never seen somebody your age have such leadership gifts and the wisdom that you possess. He said that? Yeah, he did. Or maybe it looks like this. Did you hear what Brenda said about you? No, what'd she say? Well, she said the way that you serve other people, that has caused her to realize that she needs to serve other people the way Jesus does as well. And when she sees your example and the way that you serve others, the way that Jesus did, it inspires her to be more like Christ. Really? She said that? Yeah. If you want to get caught talking about somebody, how about we talk about people like that? What if instead of getting caught complaining, criticizing, lying, or gossiping, we put all of that focus into encouraging one another and loving one another? Because that should happen the more and more that we get to know Jesus. Because the more we recognize and understand who Jesus is, the more that we will follow after his example. And then all of a sudden, our words begin to reflect those of our Creator, the one who sustains, the one who renews, who transforms our heart. And in that transformation, he changes our mouths as well. Because our mouths will follow what is happening in our hearts. Does that make sense? Is this series landing with you guys? I hope so, because it certainly challenged me. I put so much time and energy into these 4 topics we talk about: complaining, criticizing, gossiping, lying. And I'm tempted to do that. Why? Because I've made it about me. And when I make life about me, all of a sudden I look around me and I see something's not going according to my agenda. What am I going to do? I'm going to complain. Or if I make it all about me, I'm going to decide you're not doing whatever you're doing well enough. What am I going to do? I'm going to criticize. If it's all about me, I'm going to feel insecure about certain things. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start telling some little lies to make myself look a little bit better to everybody else, right? Why? Because I'm making it about me. When I make it about me, I feel insecure sometimes. I don't feel that great about things. And then I hear a juicy morsel over here. And I think, ooh, that's worth talking about. That's kind of fun to talk about that and share that with other people, right? Why? Because I've made it about me. But if we flip that, if we make it about God first, all of that changes. If we make it about God first, it's all about his purpose and about his plans for our life. All of that changes. And we start with a prayer saying, God, change me from the inside out. You got to change my heart, because this follows this. So it's not just a matter of changing what comes out of here, it's changing the source. And that's what we want to ultimately ask God to do. Because what? Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Let's pray. God, I thank you for this series. I thank you for the challenge that it has been for me, for a number of people that I have spoken to, about really making us think about the condition of our hearts. Because God, that can be hard stuff to hear at first. to hear that every word that comes out of our mouth is rooted in something deeper that's going on inside of us. And so for those of us that maybe have anger issues, we can't point at other people. We have to own it, to recognize there's something going on deeper inside that is causing me to lash out like this. If we have a tendency to get caught up in gossip all the time, we need to own that as well and recognize there's something broken inside of me that feels the need to talk about other people when I am not a part of the problem and I am not a part of the solution. God, we want to be the people, if we're going to get caught with words coming out of our mouth, we want those to be words of encouragement. We want those to be words of hope. We want those to be words of love and empowerment and of a bright future. So God, would you work in us today? Would you work in renewing our hearts? Would you work in transforming our hearts? Would you remind us again to turn our eyes to you, to get our eyes off our own puny, stupid little agendas that we keep going back to and keep them on you, because you have an amazing plan for our lives. But that plan requires an undivided focus on you. So help us to get our eyes off of ourselves and help us to look fully to you so that we can be the people that you have called us to be, so we can be the hope dealers that you have called us to be. God, thank you for that reminder of how much you love us, of the example that you gave to us in your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us to talk the talk and walk the walk. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I love that song, and I love how it ties into our next series. So our Big Fat Mouth series is over. As far as Sunday morning, the work to be done on our Big Fat Mouths continues, does it not? Our next series that we're going to be doing is called Grace is Greater. And this is going to overlap. It's going to be a 5-week series. It's going to overlap with Easter. So I want you thinking about not only how this series is going to apply to you, but I want you to be thinking about somebody that you can invite to be a part of this series. Because the reality is all of us need to have a greater understanding of God's grace. Because some of you are here and you've got some hurts going on in your life, and if you're honest about it, you're just not sure God's grace is greater than that hurt. Some of you have some kind of an addiction going on, some kind of a thing that you would classify as a weakness in your life. And if you're being honest about it, you're just going, God, I'm just not sure God's grace is bigger than my weaknesses. Easter is going to be how grace was greater than the grave. And then we're going to finish it off, lining up some testimonies that I'm going to be working on, but also talking about how God's grace is bigger than any circumstance you find yourself in. So I hope that you're going to plan on being here, but I hope you're going to go the extra step of thinking about somebody that you can invite to be a part of this. Because this series was good for us to be thinking about the words that come out of our mouths. They come from the overflow of our hearts, and we want to be hope dealers. Well, you have that chance this week is to go and invite somebody to be a part of that next series, because that next series is going to be all about hope dealing. We're going to be dealing hope all over the place, people. So bring people. We want to be the light of the world. We want to see people's lives transformed by the same God who has transformed our lives. So be praying about that. If you want to pray with some people this morning, our prayer team is up here in the corner. Otherwise, we will see you guys at WOW on Wednesday night, or we will see you next week for the first week of Grace is Greater. Love you guys. Thanks for being here.
I'm never speaking up again. It only hurts me. Oh, I'm never speaking up again.